Okay, Tov, Shavua Tov.
Boker Tov.
We're here on Kuf Tes Vav. Rav Chisda, 3 lines down from the top, and this we saw Meikara. So we're talking about a case where he only has Chazeres for Tibul Rishon, and on the first Tibul, Mevarach Ale Bar Pri Adom V'Alachilas Mora V'Yochel. He'll be Mekayim both the mitzvah of Mora, and therefore recite Alachilas Mora. And at the same time, of course, he has to make a bracha Rishona, Birchas HaNenim, that's Bar Pri Adoma, and El Basof Achil Chasa Below Bracha. B'Surya Avdi Kiravuna. In one part of Bavel called Surya, they had the minhag of being Mavarich on the Chazeres in Tibul Rishon, only Bar Pri Adoma. That's the only bracha they made on Chazeres B'Tibul Rishon, and they postponed the bracha of Alachilas Mara till Tibul Sheni. Rav Sheshes breder Rav Yeshua Ovid ki Rav Chisda. But the Gemara quotes a minhag to follow in the footsteps of Rav Chisda and to make the bracha on the Chazeres, both on the Birchas HaNenim of Bar Pri Adoma and Alachilas Mara as well. The Hilchos HaKavasei the Rav Chisda, and the Gemara finally comes to the conclusion the final ruling is like Rav Chisda, and therefore both brachos will be recited on the first Tibul. The Gemara adds that Rav Acha Breder Rava Mahader Ashar Yerokos. Rav Acha made a very special effort in order to guarantee himself that he would have Shar Yerokos for Tibul Rishon, Lafuke Nafshi Mipluta, so that he doesn't get involved in the Machlokas Rav Huna Rav Chisda, because everybody agrees that if he has, let's say, celery for Tibul Rishon, he'll make a Bar Pri Adoma, and then he has Chazeres for Tibul Sheni, and he'll make Alachilas Mara. So he gets away without entering into the Machlokas. Here we have a note, number Vav, in the name of the Slach, that's the note of Yehuda, and he says that we should derive from this conclusion of the Gemara that mitzvos strichas kavana, because the machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda applies only according to the Mandiyomar, that opinion that mitzvos strichas kavana. If on the other hand mitzvos ain't strichas kavana, then there would be no machlokas whatsoever, because ain't strichas kavana means that he was yotzei for sure with Tibul Rishon, even in the absence of kavanah, therefore he would make both brachos on Tibul Rishon. Now, what we want to do today is to take a look at the Harerei Kedem. You have the Harerei Kedem, right? Yeah. So that's on page Kuf Nun Zayin, which is the equivalent of 157. And it's Siman Ayin Zayin, B'din Achilas Karpas. Now, Rav Soloveitchik is going to derive 3 conclusions from the Rambam regarding Tibul Rishon. The Rambam writes, Perek Ches Halacha Beis, Maskil Umevarech Bori Pri Adoma, Lokeach Yerek Umetabel Oso B'charoses, V'ochel Kizayis, Hu V'chola Mesubim Imo Kol Echad V'yechad En Ochel Pachos Mikizayis. So the first conclusion is that we have to eat a full kizayis worth of karpas, of Tibul Rishon. Second conclusion is that it has to be dipped in charoses. And finally, that each one of the members of the household has his own personal obligation to eat a kizayis of the Pri Adom of the Tibul Rishon. And Agos Maimonios on this Rambam, Os Dalid, comments that kizayis ze eni yodeh mahu. Where did the Rambam get this conclusion that the first Tibul, which is Latmias Atinokos, in order to arouse the curiosity of children, has to requires an Achil of Kizayis? The Maggid Mishnah also mentions that comment. Apparently, what we should derive from this Rambam is that the takon of Tibul Rishon, even though the backdrop, the background, the motivation for this takana was hekera, but nevertheless, the takana itself is that we should eat a yerek in addition to mora. And achila requires a kizayis. So Rabbanan, they made a takana to require an achila of a yerek in addition to mora, and you can only fulfill that chiyuv achila by eating a shir of a kizayis. And what's interesting here is that we always assume that the first tibul is just sort of like a mechanical act. It's just a technicality. It's not. It doesn't have any status to it, and it's only to achieve that goal of why the children are asking, why are we doing a tibul before the suda? But in the Rambam's frame of reference, we're elevating that first tibul to a new status. It becomes one of the mitzvahs of achila, or maybe not a mitzvah of achila per se, but an obligation to eat a yerek. And if it's an obligation to eat a yerek, if that was the nature of the takana, and that was its definition, then we require kizayis. And if that be the case, we understand why the Rambam requires tibul b'charoses, because any mitzvah of achila in the nighttime requires tibul b'charoses. For example, matzah, korech, morar, and now we're going to add tibul rishon. All of the above require dipping in charoses. The only exception to that rule is when the Mikdash stood, the Korban Pesach could not be dipped into charoses because there's halacha in Korban Pesach of achilas habasar v'lo davar acher, not combining anything else with the achilas habasar. And when we do kricha, according to the Rambam Korech, we're going to wrap up the matzah and the maror. And at the time of the Mikdash, we would not add the Pesach. The Pesach, the Rambam says, would be eaten separately. So you had an achila of the Korban Pesach and a kricha of matzah maror without Pesach. Because the Pesach has to be eaten by itself. Now again, getting back to karpas, the first tibul, that requires an achila. The takana was that you need an achila, and ein achila pachas mikizayis. And not only that, once it's elevated to the status of an achila, then like all other achilas of the night, with the exception of basar pesach, we require tibul b'charosas. Now, for those who disagree with the Rambam, then it would seem that there's no need for every single member of the household to eat his or her own karpas, own tibul rishon. And certainly there's no reason to require a kezayis, nor to require tibul b'charoses. So the reason why the Rambam requires that every single member of the household have his own personal karpas is because the way the Rambam understands takon, it's a chovas achila. And if it's a chovas achila, then everybody shares that chovas achila equally. But if we accept that goes my money, it's against the Rambam. There's no chovas achila of karpas. There's no requirement of kizayis nor of charoses. And it's only to arouse the curiosity of the children at Kera, then it's logical to assume that only the Baal Bayis is going to do the Tibul Rishon and eat a Chatzi Zayis of Karpas. Because all the other Shinuyim, all the other changes that are implemented on this night are implemented by the Baal Bayis alone. For example, we're going to talk, and that's going to be the next Siman on page Kuf Nun Tes, which is called Akiras HaShulchan, and that's only the Shulchan in front of the Baal Bayis. And that's enough to arouse the curiosity of the children. There's no need to require each one of the members of the Shulchan to have his own Akira. And therefore, it makes sense that Chatzi Zayis of Karpas could be eaten as a Shinui by the Balabayis. I guess all eyes are on the Balabayis. If he's camera shy, he should not be leading the Seder. So the Rambam says, in regard to Akiras HaShulchan, it's only Lifnei Misha Omer HaAgad. Now, we make a bracha Bori Pri Adam on Karpas, and we have in mind to patter up the Maror. And everyone at the table has the minhag of eating a Karpas, but for a different reason, not because of the mitzvah of Karpas, of Tibul Rishon. That's, according to our sheet against the Rambam, only incumbent upon the Balabayis. Why is everybody eating their own Karpas? It's only because of the problem of Birchas HaNenim, that we want to get a bracha up and running to bridge it until he eats the maror, so that he doesn't need to make a bar pri adam on the maror. And the Rashbam writes, Pshita hecha de iko shar yirokus mevarch ashar yirokus bori pri adam. And the Rashbam says, Hachi shapir tfei sheyivarch bar pri adam tchila. Tahainu bracha ru'uya lahem v'poter es hamarar b'berchas bar pri adam v'achach yivarch al chazeres al achilas mar. So in other words, he wants to get the bar pri adama on the yerek and not on the marar. So the marar enjoys the benefit of the bar pri adama that he recited b'tibul rishon. And this has to do with a principle called Ein Osim Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos. So we said that, there's a problem of Birchas HaMitzvah plus Birchas HaNenim on the same object. In matzah, we tried to argue that there are two different matzahs, if you remember. And here we remember that in the piyutim that were authored by Rabbi Yosef Tov Elem, he writes, V'loma shar yerokos bo tchila. Why does he start with shar yerokos? Liftar chazeres shel mitzvah bracha ruyel. So that then when he gets the chazeres, he doesn't have the responsibility and the obligation to recite a birchas HaNenim. He already did so on the first Tibul with the bar pri adama, and all he needs is a birchas HaMitzvah. And that we saw the Tosfos quotes Rabbi Yosef Tov Elem. Now, there's a halacha called Tibul b'mashke. All right, if you have, let's say, vinegar or salt water, and you do a Tibul of a yerek into them, then you're obligated in Netilas Yadayim. This has to do with Tumah V'Tara. So Yadayim Shnios, and he should be Mataras Yadayim, because otherwise he might passel Truma when he comes in contact with Yadayim onto the Truma, so therefore he does Netilas Yadayim. Now, it seems that the Balabayis is going to wash his hands and eat the yerek. But according to the Rambam, the Shara Mesubim also have to eat the yerek. And the reason for that is, well, according to the Rambam, because of mitzvah chila, but according to the other poskim like Hagos Mamonios, it's because you want to patter up the bar pri adam for the maror. Now, there are dinim of Tumah V'Tara here that are a bit more complicated. They're out of our reach. That once he does a tibul of one yerek, and tibul meaning he dips the yerek into a mashke, then that he does as part of the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and perhaps the the mashke is a zecher for, the tears or whatever it is. It's part of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, so that's fine. That is a requirement for the Baal HaSeder, so to speak, the Baal HaBayis. For the other people, according to our minhag, against the Rambam, they're only eating a yerek in order to recite a bar pri adama. There's no need for them to dip that yerek into a mashke, because every yerek, with or without a mashke, requires a bar pri adama. So whereas the Baal HaBayis himself is going to require tibul b'mashke, and therefore he's going to require netilas yadayim, and the mashke here is either chometz or mei-melech. That's all part and parcel of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's a responsibility that's incumbent exclusively on the Baal HaGada, the Baal HaSeudah. Because Heker L'Tinokos is only a requirement on the Omer HaGada. The other people at the Seudah, according to our minhag, will require achilas karpas, but they don't need to dip it into a mashke. They're only using the achila of the first tibul for an excuse to make a bar pri adama. They could take any yerek. It could be a dry potato, a dry carrot, and there's no need for them to do a tibul b'mashke. Of course, the purpose of the tibul b'mashke is for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we said that as far as that's concerned, all we need is the Baal HaGada. So this Seder night, you can make an announcement at your Seder that everyone, you pass around the potatoes or the celery, whatever you're passing around, and tell them they don't need tibul b'mashke. I wouldn't do it because you'll make a whole raucous there. They'll... Now, Rav Soloveitchik wants to add another nafkamina that according to the Rambam, there's a din of achila of Tibul Rishon, a kezayis of karpas. And we need Tibul in whatever may, according to the Rambam, in charosas. And also, according to the Rambam, every single person at the table is obligated in achilas kezayis of karpas. Then another nafkamina would be haseba. The Rambam should require haseba for the special mitzvah of achilas karpas. And in fact, the Avudraham is of that opinion, that karpas requires haseba. Apparently, Avudraham accepted the Shittas Rambam that there's a din of achila of kizayis and karpas, a chi of achila that's incumbent on every single member of the household, and therefore it's not just latmiya satinokas, but it's also a separate mitzvah achila that requires heseva. Now, according to our minhag, the purpose of Tibul Rishon is not achila, but rather latmiya satinokos, just a technical act, and it doesn't require heseva. Heseva is only by achila, but there's no achila. The Rambam writes, Maskil u'mevarech borei pri hadam. What does it mean, maskil? Maskil implies that he's beginning the Haggadah. He's beginning Seder Alayla with borei pri hadama. That's not so. He needs a borei pri hadama as a birkas hanenim. What's the maskil? What's the Rambam trying to emphasize here? So Rav Soloveitchik has an amazing chidush here. And he says that the Bar Pri Adam, in addition to being a Birchas Hanenim, it takes on a new status as part and parcel of the Seder. And that's again according to the Rambam, that Karpas is a mitzvah achila. And not only that, even if we reject the Rambam, we still could maintain that the Tibul Rishon is part of the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim insofar as it's meant to arouse the curiosity of the children. Why are we dipping a yerek before the Suda? And it could be that since the purpose of dipping the first yerek before the Suda is to arouse the curiosity of the children, that itself injects it into the framework of Vigada to Labincha. And now, once you do that, you want to make a Bar Pri Adama as part of the Achila itself. What do I mean? It's not just the regular classic Mati or Birchas Hanenim, Kol Hanenim in Olam HaZeh B'lo Bracha Yilmal, but rather becomes a part and parcel of the Seder Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's the mitzvah of Karpas. Since we're eating the Karpas and dipping it before the Suda to arouse the curiosity of the children, that becomes part of the mitzvah of Sipur, of Vigada to Labincha. And therefore, the Bar Pri Adama takes on a new status. It's part and parcel of the mitzvah of Karpas. And it's Kovea, the Tibul Rishon, before the Suda. And that's going to arouse the curiosity of the children. The Tur writes in Siman Tov Pei Daled, in the name of his father, the Rosh, that Bori Pri Adama on Karpas could be recited even if he doesn't eat anything from the Karpas. And that's an argument against the Bala Itur. Bala Itur is of the opinion, which is intuitive, that the Bar Pri Adama has to be preceded by a te'ima of some sort. You got to eat from it. And the Tur says no. And he equates it with the Birchas HaMitzvah. And therefore, just like in a Birchas HaMitzvah, you don't have to taste anything. Here too, you could be Mavarech even though he doesn't taste. Wow. Could you imagine making a Bar Pri Adama on Karpas and not eating anything? That seems to be the Torah Shita, the name of the Rosh. And the reason for that is because Bar Pri Adama takes on the status of a quasi Birchas HaMitzvah. It's part of the Tibul. And therefore, whether you eat from it or not is irrelevant. This is an amazing overlap of Birchas Hanenim and Birchas HaMitzvah, where Birchas Hanenim becomes a Birchas HaMitzvah. This is very similar to what Rav Salvation used to tell us in the name of Reb Chaim, that on Kiddush, Leil Shabbos, the Bori Pri Agofen is part and parcel of the Kiddush. So even though you might give out the wine to other people to drink, and you yourself are not drinking, you don't have to worry about the Bar Pri Agofen, because the Bar Pri Agofen becomes integrated into the framework of Kiddush. And now we're saying that the Bar Pri Adama becomes integrated into the framework of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. In Orachaim Siman Tov Ayin Gimel, the Magen Avram writes, "Umavarach Bar Pri Adama Kodem Atibul, Kedei Sheyehei over Lasiyasan, for who had din b'mar." Wait a second, he's talking about Bar Pri Adama. And he's talking about over Lasiyasan. Over Lasiyasan is only applicable to a Birchas HaMitzvah. And he wants the bracha to be before the actual Tibul. So it's not enough that you do the Tibul and then you make the Bar Pri Adama. You should make the Bar Pri Adama and then do the Tibul. And he says this in the name of the Maril, one of the great pillars of Ashkenazic Pesach. Now, if this bracha bar pri adam is on the achila, so you should do the tibul first and then recite the bar pri adam. And yet, the Maril says just the opposite, that the bar pri adam should be recited before the tibul. And he invokes the concept of over lasiyosan. So why is it that the bracha is before the tibul? So the answer is that if bar pri adama would be a birchas hanenim, then first do the tibul and then recite the bracha when you're ready for the achila. But the bracha bar pri adama on Tibul Rishon is not like birchas hanenim, but it's part and parcel of the Suda, part and parcel of the Seder of Tibul Rishon. Therefore, the bar pri adama has to come before the Tibul, because it's not a birchas hanenim, but a birchas hamitzvah over lasiyosan, and that's what we were medayik in the Rama maskil u'mevarech. Now in Morar, when we do Tibul b'charoses, then this is what's called Zecha L'Tit, and he has to make the bracha of Achilas Mar before the Tibul. So the Bar Pri Adama before the Tibul Rishon, and the Al Achilas Mar before the Tibul Sheni, and in both cases we're implementing or applying the principle of over lasiyos. So we have now another nafkamina in our diak of maskil u'mavarech that the bracha should come before the tibul, and that's the bar pri adam. The Rambam writes that bisman hazeh she'ein lanu karban achar shemavarech amotzi lechem chozer mavarech al achilas matzah u'mitabel matzah b'charosas v'yocher. So if we apply the Maril's reasoning here, then he should do the tibul after the brach, right? He says Vorech hamotzi lechem, then he's mevorech al chilas matzah, and then mitabel, because over lasiyosan requires over l'tchilas asiyosan before you begin the mitzvah, and the mitzvah itself begins with tibul b'charosas. The Rambam writes v'yachakach korech matzah u'morar ki echad u'metabel b'charosas u'mevarech. So we said over and over again that the bracha has to come before the tibul, like we saw before, u'mevarech al achilas matzah, etc., u'metabel b'charosas. But here the Rambam is saying, with regard to Korech, where we put the matzah and the maror together, and we dip it into charosas before the bracha. The Rambam is inconsistent. He should have said that he should wait with the tibul until after he recites the bracha. So it could be that bisman habayis, everything is tafel to the Pesach. He says, "Ein chiyuv shel heker be'atibul matzah umor." So I guess when you have this primary chiyuv, this colossal, gigantic chiyuv, which is called Pesach at the time of the Mikdash, then somehow the heker of Tibul b'matzah umar sort of loses out. Hakol batel of Pesach. And therefore we go back to the general rule not to be mafsik between the bracha and the achil. So he does the Tibul before the achil. And that ends our discussion here of Siman Ayin Zayin.